Today we're going to be discussing amateur radio repeaters. And what is a repeater? Well, a repeater is basically just two radios, 69 together, with a duplexer in between. The duplexer handles the Vox control and some other shit, but it's really not a complicated machine at all. Technically, you could probably build one in your basement. It's not exactly legal to run your own without getting it verified through the FCC, but just saying, that's how easy it is to put one together. Now, what is a repeater used for? Well, when you're using a handheld radio like this, or even a mobile, you're not going to get out too far because, for one thing, the antennas on this isn't that big, and you're not going to get too much elevation, and you're running off a battery, so the power output isn't going to be that high. So what they do is they take a radio and they put it in a high location, whether it be on a tower, on the top of a mountain, usually someplace that they can get it up really high. They use really high-grade feed line that's probably too expensive for you to afford to use at home. And it's just the optimal situation. And they can put out a lot more power. And what it does is it will repeat what I say on this handheld radio. It'll repeat it out, but much louder so that you can get farther distances. How it works is I would transmit on one frequency and it repeats it out on another frequency. That's what we call an offset. I'm not good with numbers, so I need to look at my laptop, but yeah, if you're transmitting on a 2-meter band, the offset is plus or minus 600 kilohertz. If you transmit on 70 centimeter, it's plus or minus 5 megahertz. I'll put in the show notes for other bands what the offset is. But like I said, it receives on one frequency and transmits it back out on another frequency, and at a much, much higher power. Now, this could get quite noisy. Repeaters could pick up other transmissions, accidental noise or whatever. So they use what's called a PL tone to verify that the signal should be repeated out. I'll list in the show notes the different set of PL tones, but it's a tone in a sub-audible, yeah, I can talk today, a sub-audible frequency, something far below what humans can hear. When you transmit with your radio, it sends out this tone, and that tells the repeater, okay, this is meant to be sent back out, this is meant to be repeated, and the repeater will repeat it. Most repeaters use them nowadays. You might be able to find a couple that don't, but I'd say 90% out of them use PL tones. One of the first things to remember when transmitting on the repeater is listen for a couple minutes. Make sure there isn't somebody else talking. You don't want to be rude and jump into somebody else's conversation and step all over them. When you do transmit on the repeater, when the person you're talking to is done talking, wait 5 or 10 seconds before you transmit again. This gives some time for somebody else to step in, identify. They might want to join the conversation, or there could be emergency or some kind of priority traffic that needs to get in. As with everything else in amateur radio, emergency traffic takes priority. All the rules that apply to normal traffic don't apply to emergency traffic. When talking on a repeater, even on simplex, it doesn't matter what class you have. No one has higher privileges. No one can step on somebody else. Nobody owns the airwaves. Whether you're a technician, you're an extra, or a general class, you don't own the airway. A technician doesn't have to give up the frequency they're talking on to an extra or a general. It just doesn't work that way. The only way that you do have to give up the frequency you're talking on is to emergency traffic. They have priority over everything. If somebody comes on and they have a legitimate emergency, you either help them out or get the fuck off the airwaves. That's just plain simple. That's how it works. You can also connect to phone lines with a repeater. I'm not quite sure how to do it yet. I haven't done it myself, but This isn't as popular as it used to be now that cell phones are available, but 10 years ago, you can get on the repeater and as you see, there's a keypad on the radio. You can dial DTMF tones and actually connect to a landline or cell phone, whatever, dial a phone through the repeater. Everybody on the repeater with a scanner, whatever, can listen into your phone conversations, so be careful, don't go dialing up your bank and punching in your PIN code and getting your account balance and stuff like that. Phone calls on the repeater should be limited. You shouldn't sit on there for hours at a time. Quick phone conversation is fine. Not too many repeaters now that I know of still have phone patch enabled for general use, but most of them, if you get on the repeater and you dial 911 on the keypad, it will connect you immediately to a 911 operator, and you can use that for emergencies. Now let's see. But yeah, when talking on the repeater or even on simplex, just use plain English. None of the bullshit that you hear on CB radios. People don't use 10 codes or sit there and slur and sing their call signs and stuff like that. That's all bullshit for CB radio, and all you do is piss everybody off on ham with that. Just use regular English. Don't worry about making mistakes if you're new. People will correct you, not in a negative way. They'll just make suggestions and whatever. And repeaters are a lot like IRC. Every repeater you go on has different etiquette. They not exactly rules, but people talk differently, or they have different guidelines and everything, and they'll inform you if you do something different than how they like. Sometimes repeaters are dominated by groups like Aries, Racies, stuff like that, and it tends to be majority of the people are emergency services, and they tend to shun people like me that aren't involved in emergency services and they're just people interested in making new friends or whatever. Just find another repeater, or just use their repeater when they're not using it or whatever. Don't get discouraged. Every repeater is different, different communities, different groups. We're going to cut ahead to some footage. Fox and I were talking on the BEARS network. I think it stands for Bristol Emergency Services. We were able to communicate. I'm in Bridgeton, New Jersey. He's up in Brooklyn, New York. I was connecting to the Vineland repeater, which then connects to a couple other repeaters, and it relays it all the way back and forth. He's up in Brooklyn, New York. He was connecting to a repeater somewhere in North Jersey. I'll put in the show notes where it is. I forget exactly where it was. And then Ugster was up in Central Jersey listening in with his Per 95 scanner. He doesn't have his license yet, but he's working on it. And he was able to hear both of us. And we'll cut to some footage to show the communications that we made. We also were able to talk to somebody out in, I think it was Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And towards the end, I'm not sure if we got footage of it or not, but somebody from Maryland came on and made contact with them. So I hope you found this useful, and watch the footage ahead, and we'll be covering more amateur radio segments throughout the rest of the season.
Well, as we were saying before, NYPD decided to go and roll through my actual recording studio.
We're pushing, right now I'm pushing at least a 30-mile link, and then it's what, about 150 miles from the repeater that on BEARS that I'm entering down to you in Vineland?
It's somewhere like that. I MapQuested it out, and driving directions, it's about, I think, 120 or 130 miles, so it's probably a little bit less radio-wise, depending on exactly what path the repeaters are taking. I'm not really sure, but yeah, somewhere around that. It's still pushing a really good distance for 3 watts.
Yeah, this is actually a really widespread repeater network. This goes all the way down to Maryland. I've actually picked up people from Pennsylvania. Unfortunately, I don't have line of sight with the repeater because of all of the apartment buildings and whatnot that are in the way where I live, so, but you do what you gotta do, right?
Yeah, I'm sure once eventually you get a place where you can put up a better antenna, you'll get even farther. You'll be able to talk to people all over the place. But yeah, it's pretty impressive that you can talk so far with such a low-powered HT. I have to operate at 5 watts here. I tried bumping it down to half a watt and then to 3 watts. It didn't even peg the repeater at half a watt. At 3 watts it did, but Ugster reported that it was quite noisy, so I bumped it back up to 5 watts, and he says it sounds pretty good.
Yeah, it really seems like you're having a hard time pushing the signal to get into the Vineland. You're using the double ZEP, right?
Yeah, I'm using the double ZEP, but I haven't been up on the roof in months to check on it. I have no idea. You know, there could be rust on it or whatnot. I'm not sure.